So today in CSC 343, we'll review, we'll conduct an item analysis of the Module 1 assessment. Just to have a quick review of student progress, understanding of the concepts and methods, the basics introduced in Module 1. The average score was 3.73, just short of 3 3/4, which on a 5-point scale approaches 75%. So it's right at the C level. That's an excellent first result, considering there's a lot of new material and additional material in the mix. There were 23 possible questions, and out of 60 minutes, students on average took 38 minutes to complete the assessment. So there is latitude to spend more time. These are open reference assessments. You can have study guides open and other references available on screen. The goal is to demonstrate how much you know at this point. The Blackboard rubric is not rigged for mastery learning, so in some cases it can't calculate whether a question was a problem question, but we'll be able to determine that by looking at it and student responses. We have, according to the difficulty rubric, Blackboard measured that 5 were easy questions, 2 were hard questions, and 16 were medium difficulty, which is really a sweet spot. We want most of our questions to be a challenge. We don't want too many easy ones or too many hard ones. Although it's not bad if you have, a few more hard questions. Good morning, Suleiman. How are you?
Morning, I'm good.
So let's begin. This first question, typically multiple answer questions are more challenging because they're scenario based. So we will spend some quality time on that. If we have an item where everybody got it correct, we're not going to worry about, like at the end here, multiple choice answers where everyone got it correct. We'll go ahead and skip over those. Ideal versus real, multiple choice question that posed a challenge for students reads, select the statement below that best reflects the reality of initial forensic investigations with ideal conditions. Ideal conditions are rare, as most organizations engage forensic analysis as a last resort with little or no planning. The current state of things is pretty bad, which is why we stress that preemptive, proactive advocation, you need to be evangelists of the value of digital forensics as a discipline and a resource with potential customers. And if you can get out there and work the EAT up front, that you'll do much better. It says, most students answered with an effective EAT program, real conditions will more likely reflect ideal conditions. I guess I can see how that would be a popular choice. And what I'll do is assess whether or not the question needs to be revised for better clarity. But this answer assumes that you have an EAT program up front. Oh, yeah, I see how this, you know what? I'm going to change the answer here. So if you have initial forensic investigations and ideal conditions are the case, that would mean that EAT programs are there. So I think what's happened is that the baseline question must have been revised as an alternate for an alternate version. And there should have been some edits up here. So I'll go ahead and change the scoring of this after the fact. And then that way, if you answered this item in this manner, you'll see a slight increase in your score, and you won't have to reconcile this item, okay? And then for the final version of the module assessment, we'll specify a different scenario for a case where this is also true. One thing we want to make sure students understand is that the real world is like this. An ideal world would look like this, and that's the point. Any questions before we continue on the next item? True, false. Exculpatory digital evidence is data forensically captured and analyzed that incriminates an individual, proves they are likely guilty. That is false. Exculpatory, that would be inculpatory evidence. So inculpatory evidence incriminates. Exculpatory digital evidence exonerates or frees a suspect of guilt. So exculpatory is another way of saying exonerating. Digital evidence that exonerates. It relieves the burden of guilt, right? So whenever you see EX, remember that's exoneration. That's proof that someone is not guilty. Incrimination, inculpatory evidence is stuff that establishes guilt, okay? Any questions about those choice of words? Okay. Mission critical scenario. So there's a multi-answer item where students were challenged. The scenario reads, a digital evidence specialist is hired to assist local IT staff who are tasked with maintenance and support of essential company technology. So this would be an ideal case where digital evidence is appreciated and valued, and people get that it's going to be a more effective use of digital forensics expertise is on the front side because it helps prevent problems, right? The DES is to perform an informal routine investigation that is intended to guide the IT staff on how best to enhance local and domain policies. Now, when we say domain policies, the reference there is local security policies and Active Directory, Microsoft Active Directory domain policies. It is clear from inspection of a system used by mission critical personnel. So, and that's between two asterisks. So, you know, that means they're very important people, right? That selected user profiles listed in the registry don't match the existing profiles shown in the user directory of a system. So when we were doing our baseline solution, that was one criteria that you were asked to gauge on your own system. It is also clear that user profiles in the user directory do not track with the accounts listed in system settings or control panel. So we have some hitchhikers. That's what this means. Based on this scenario, select any statement below that is a reasonable recommendation the DES must document, right? You want to implement a login banner to inform potential system users of restricted access for authorized use only. So it could be a case where you have some important systems being used by important people, but when the login screen comes up, there isn't a warning that says, hey, if you're not a part of this organization, You know, this system is intended for official use only, and you spell out some kind of banner. That's an appropriate recommendation. Any questions about that recommendation? Change active system audit log settings to include a record of login attempts and account changes. So what you want to do is track when and how those things are happening. And that's a prudent recommendation because those things are not ordinarily, they may not ordinarily be logged or audited on a given system. And because this is a mission critical system, you want to make sure those safeties are hot and running all the time. Propose education, awareness, and training of local IT staff on related incident handling measures. So this is relevant because in the course of routine maintenance, system upgrades, and customary service, the description of the scenario, the IT staff should have picked up on this a long time ago. Especially if it's a mission critical system and it's high profile personnel, IT routine tech support engages those systems more often. It's like, why are we catching this with a forensic review? This is something that should have been obvious. When somebody goes in there to assist critical personnel and they're in the users directory and it's like, well, wait a minute, who are these extra people? That's a flag. It is a subtle but important cue that some in-house procedures need to be tightened up on. Does that make sense? All right, let's look at the other answer choices to see why those wouldn't be. Prescribe comprehensive use of encryption technology on all systems to prevent unauthorized access to sensitive data. Yeah, you could recommend that, but it's overkill and it would likely be rejected by a lot of folks, which would also put your own credibility as a specialist at stake. This is a special case for mission critical personnel who are on, an important system. So doing it everywhere would be like overkill and pretty costly and involve a lot of training for everyone, where a lot of the users may not require that. Does that make sense? Does everybody understand why this would not be a good recommendation, given the scenario?
Yeah.
Okay. Endorse the full logging inputs and outputs on all systems to allow detection of remote access. That's another example of overkill. So if you're doing that for all systems, and you're logging everything, all inputs and outputs on all systems, that's a huge amount of log data. You would have to double the capacity of your data center just to track. You will store as much data doing that as you would just to do your original, your authentic work. So logs can consume a huge amount of information. And then somebody has to do it. Nobody answered this last one, right? So law enforcement, right? Criminal trespass. Yeah, it didn't say that there was evidence that there was unauthorized data access or something to that extent. So that would be clearly overkill. Any questions about this item in particular, or comments or observations? Okay, moving right along. Tipping point. This multiple choice question reads, subject matter experts explain that for most forensic investigations, a tipping point is reached. And that's a key phrase or term that we called out in session. And we do that in the study guide. Select the answer below that explains best what this is and what it means. When you're investigating formally, informally, you can reach a point where you have to take into account the Fourth Amendment of the US Constitution, and further investigation would mean you would have to demonstrate or document the interest, because you're going beyond the guarantees of privacy afforded by the US Constitution. Further use of forensic tools, you have to start logging things like probable cause, and so you can't go any further. You reach a point where you can't go any further. And this is common if you're doing good forensic work and there's a reasonable number of let's say there's a dozen people or more in an organization that you're serving. The odds are pretty good that a certain percentage of those workers are doing things they probably shouldn't be doing on the systems. And so let's look at the alternate answer where most students answered. It said the Fourth Amendment guarantees privacy. All use of forensic tools first requires a proper warrant. No, it doesn't. All use does not require a proper warrant. It's possible for some use to occur, and it's possible to continue to use forensic tools within certain boundaries, even after you reach that tipping point. But in cases where it looks like there's criminal intent or there could be litigation, you want to make sure that you're not violating any standards. So a lot of it depends on the scenario, but this is why all use requires a warrant. That's not true. You can still use forensic tools, but you have to, there are limits and boundaries you cannot exceed without a warrant. And that's the distinction. Does everybody understand that distinction? Okay. Can someone unmute their mic and let me know we're still breathing?
Yeah, we're still here.
Here.
All right. Subject matter expert. Zytyko. And the DCFL, a former director of the Defense Computer Forensic Laboratory, was among the first to write a treatise on the different types of digital forensics. That is true. So there's actually a statement in your study guide by Zytyko, but it's an image capture, it's not text. So, but it's in there. Any questions about this true false item? Moving right along, we'll run down to here. Moving right along. You know of a colleague who will soon launch a new forensic consulting practice as a sole proprietor. That means they're a lone wolf. They're going into business for themselves. They don't have partners or staff. That's what that statement means. This individual intends to serve government, the court systems, and law enforcement. Well, in one of our recent classes, we said, hey, if you're gonna be involved with law enforcement, you have to be ANSI certified right here. Okay. Now, how does this answer differ from the one that some students chose in error? It says vendor agnostic certification, ANSI accreditation for the office, one isolated system for analysis and a second one for research. I believe the minimum is 2 isolated systems for analysis and a third system for research. So it's reversed. So what can happen with a single proprietor is that if you're doing forensics, and let's pretend that ransomware is embedded inside there, and when you start working, it's triggered by an action of the forensic examiner. What happens to the forensic workstation? If ransomware is unleashed on a forensic workstation while somebody's examining files and they open it up, what would happen to the ability of the sole proprietor to work?
This system is complete on, well, their sole system is, if they were to have one, would be out of commission.
Right. So just because you're one person doesn't mean you only need one system. And that's a finer point of the diagram in the slides. Now, if you go back to the slides and it shows, you know, if it shows this, then I'm going to have to revise the study guide to make sure we call that out, because I would change that diagram. The important thing to understand is that you always have to expect the unexpected. Yes, this is like one of those foundation principles. You always have to be able to prove it, and you have to be able to expect the unexpected. So if you have a second machine, you can begin work on, okay, what just happened, while you're recovering the first machine, so you're not dead in the water. I hope that makes sense. Forensic examination types, right? So digital forensic examinations can be organized or classified into categories. Select the answer that reflect accurate or correct statements. Informal and formal investigations. Yeah, that's 2 categories of forensic investigation. Formal private and formal public is also true. If we're choosing these answers, forensic investigations aren't categorized or classified by the client. Nonprofit, government, private corporation, or whether you're dealing with a civil or criminal case, there's still legal involved. And or computer forensics network, that has to do with different types of forensics. So that's a bogus answer that was pulled from a question about how many different kinds of digital forensics are there, according to Zetiko, right? So that's a bogus answer. So that's about what types of forensics there are. This has to do with what types of investigations there are using digital forensics. So the focus here is about how we classify investigations, not how we classify the types of forensics. Does that make sense? We had a fair number. We have a fair number of students that chose that answer, and I just wanted to make sure everybody understood with clarity there. Okay. Common challenges. There are 3 common challenges that are known to either degrade or to affirm or enhance forensic capabilities. Select the answer below or answers below that apply. The ready capability of a DES to prove it when pressed to validate results. That's something that a forensic evidence, a digital evidence specialist is always able to do on demand at any time, right? It's like, oh, so this was an outcome of what was it? Yeah. How can you prove that, right? Because any outcome of your analysis could be challenged, and you half the time is challenged. There are stakeholders in the mix that probably won't do well once bad things are revealed. So on a common sense term, it's like, okay, that's why this happens a lot. And that's why not everybody is a digital evidence specialist, right? I mean, some people don't like to have to explain themselves all the time. You're going to have to explain often as a digital evidence specialist. A clearly established line of authority that prevents interference during investigations. So that enhances forensic capabilities. If you don't have that up front and you start a forensic investigation, or just an informal forensic activity to help an IT shop, if there isn't a line of authority established, even in informal cases, you'd be shocked at how often it gets really sticky very fast. And then to faithfully calibrate, validate, and certify each time a forensic tool or method is used. This gets back to, and it's part of being able to prove it, right? So in order for you to have confidence to defend, that's what's required. Now this says ANSI accreditation of the Digital Forensic Laboratory. That's a requirement if you're working for law enforcement or the government. It is not something that enhances forensic capabilities necessarily, but it does enhance your ability to serve certain customers. So ANSI accreditation by itself doesn't provide anything that a well-stocked laboratory would have anyway. Proper use of digital forensic tools with the original artifact collected. Now that's a loaded gun. Let's read this carefully. We're going to use the digital forensic tools on what? The original artifact collected? No! No! Yeah, this is that thing where I tell people never, never, never use an original artifact. Always use what?
Copy of it?
And can you use just any copy? It has to be a certain type of copy. A precisely identical copy. Right? So you use a copy and you're able to prove that what you're using for analysis is exactly identical to the original. And then you have chain of evidence intact so that the original artifact is retired and stored properly after creation of an authentic copy, right? So if you ever have to use the original artifact to duplicate another identical copy, you have to work that whole chain of evidence thing. Okay, so you made another copy of the evidence? Yeah. Why? Well, the first one blew up. Why? Well, because there was ransomware in there. Okay, so can I see the evidence log where you pulled the original out of the locker? How was it stored? How long was it out? Did you put it back right away? Who witnessed that you put it back in there? If it's law enforcement and it involves somebody going to jail, directly to jail for a long time, you're going to get questions like that on the witness stand. Because they're going to want to imply that maybe your evidence isn't all that. That's what they'll do. So as long as you're ready for them, you're good. Baseline issues, I think, is where we are. Baseline issues. A forensic professional attempts to capture a proper benchmark of proper secure, okay, I overused the word proper here, secure function for a mission critical system used to provision redundant, clustered, resilient resources used by public safety. Holy buckets. So what's implied here in the scenario? You have a system and it's mirrored or clustered. So if something is wrong with the one member, what eventually happens to all the other members in the cluster? Does everybody understand a server cluster and what it does? It's fault tolerance and redundancy. So let's say you have a server with essential information and it's part of a cluster, and there's an exact set of data on that server, and then it becomes infected with ransomware. If the cluster is set to replicate changes to the other member servers in the cluster, what do you think happens on the other servers eventually? Are they without the ransomware, or do they also have the ransomware? Does everybody understand the question?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the important point about the question is this is a server and it's part of a cluster and it's used for public safety. So what we've done is turned the priority dial, the mission critical dial, all the way up to the top, all the way to 10. It is clear that matters of life and death could be impacted by service availability, right? However, the forensic professional notes that baseline values for the activity levels of components are very high even when no applications are running. So the forensic evidence specialist detects with that baseline, wait a minute, when I look at this and I look at my baseline, I'm not, if the servers are idling and they're not doing anything, but the CPU is maxed out, the disk is maxed out, the Ethernet is maxed out, right? All known updates, service packs, and fixes have been verified for the firmware, operating system, and all software. But the baseline isn't right. What reasonable conclusion must the forensic professional affirm under these conditions? You want to recommend to the customer that you have a kernel level exploit. So essentially, you've got a bad embedded deep infection. If you read in your study guide, it says one value of a baseline as a resource for forensic analysis is that it may be the only thing that tips you off to help you detect that there's a kernel level exploit. Because the metrics are all reading fine, or the metrics are all reading uncharacteristically high, even though there's nothing running. So if you have a server in a maintenance mode and it's just sitting there idling, but everything's whacked, that means you have a deep problem. And if this is mission critical and it has to do with matters of life and death, and there are multiple copies of this, you don't have a valid baseline. The fact that you can't create or capture a proper baseline is huge. And if I didn't stress that enough in the first place, I think I mentioned something like, hey, if your baseline is whacked and these levels are high, that's evidence that you need to reload your operating system. We're talking about a bare metal wipe and a system overhaul in order to capture a proper baseline. So, wow, what a first challenge, okay? If a forensic professional is in the mix and they discover this, it's very important for them to call this out and then help the customers understand what's going on. Oh, I need to, wait a minute, I thought you were capturing a forensic baseline as a first step in working with us. Yeah, that's right. So we can use it as a resource to detect if something's wrong because we're doing preventative stuff. Yeah, that's right. But what you're saying instead is that we're past that point. Yeah, that's right. We're past that point and you have a fried egg, a scrambled one at that, okay? If this isn't how a baseline works, and then you educate your people on how a baseline works and what it means. Because they have some issues. And if you don't call that out right up front, not only do you not have a proper baseline, but ultimately, so I know this is a complex scenario, but it really speaks to a lot of the principles and concepts we've been talking about in our first module material. Okay. I hope that helps explain things. So one student answered, the hardware the system used for the baseline is faulty. Use of another system is warranted. No, that's not likely the case. If the activity levels, plural, are very high, even when no applications are running, that's not a single hardware component. Okay. Any questions? All right. Primary benefit. Select the best answer from choices below. The primary benefit of for an organization of pursuing a routine and private sector forensic investigation, in contrast with a formal public sector investigation, is it is least disruptive to critical operations. Once something becomes formal and public, a good example of this is a government agency is involved and there's e-discovery. So they have to cough up all the email inboxes for all of the stakeholders, right? That's very disruptive, or can be very disruptive. Private sector forensic investigations, you have some latitude to figure out how to work the process where you don't disrupt the operations. Advanced forensic skills are required for both. So all of the above here would not be a good answer choice. The cost of a criminal case may be avoided. If you do a private sector forensic investigation, but there's something criminal surfaces, it is no longer a private investigation. You have to involve law enforcement, right? So you start involving public law enforcement agencies. All of the above is that these other answers are not as well, there are always special cases, but no, most of the time. The Secret Service. And so here's where we are. Why don't we take a short break and then we'll pick up with Secret Service and finish here and then run down to the multi-answer items and matching at the bottom. Okay? Let's all just take a short break and we'll be right back. The Secret Service. Multiple choice question. New agents who train for the U.S. Secret Service are each tasked with the responsibility to be capable of clearly identifying counterfeit bills. They invest no time in studying bogus paper money. Rather, they spend all their time and energy learning well all of the authentic features of the genuine article from the U.S. Treasury, the Bureau of Printing and Engraving. Now, I know that statement is a little bit exaggerated. Obviously, when they come across a counterfeit bill, they're examining a counterfeit bill. But when they're training, they spend the lion's share of their time, and then they lay hands on fake bills, and their entire focus is all on the authentic features. And that stands out. When the authentic stuff isn't there, it bites them on the nose. You know, the watermark is missing or the micro thread. It's fascinating stuff, but I would like to clarify a little further about what we mean by those, that statement. They invest their time in studying the authentic, and then when they're presented with a bogus sample, they can detect it almost immediately because one of the safety measures is not present. And counterfeiters they come up with so many near misses. If their focus of the study was instead to try to learn the 57 different methods of counterfeiting, it would take them a lot longer and their detection wouldn't be as good. So just think about that. If you know what's right, that's the whole point of a baseline. If you know what's right, you pick up right away on the fact that something is off. But instead, if you have to look for like 57 different kinds of problems, your checklist is 57 items long, and just in terms of being able to follow through, that's just not a practical approach. I hope that helps narrow things down. So knowledge of proper system baseline function is a mission critical skill for forensic first responders and for specialists alike, DEFR and DES. Any questions about this item? Which network criteria? You are tasked to establish a baseline record for a system that includes network criteria. Which of the following options below is most relevant or useful given this forensic interest? All outbound email would exclude all inbound email. So that's incomplete. DNS records in the active cache. Well, that changes depending on the connection, and so that's not as relevant, but the number of active session connections is the most relevant. So in terms of establishing a baseline record, if your system is properly configured and when it's operating and being used for business, there are 16 different active connections to known resources. That is a great baseline record, because if there's like 21 active connections a week later, something is up. DNS records can change all the time due to a phenomenon in the DNS world known as dynamic DNS. Is everybody familiar with dynamic DNS? It's a service that allows like people with temporary addresses to put their stuff out there because the DNS record changes. That's something we'll talk about more in greater detail later. It's kind of a specialty field. All right. Which command? So in the same ballpark, when we're talking about network forensics, which common command provides essential layer 2 and layer 3 criteria needed to establish proper system baseline? ipconfig/all provides the MAC address, that's layer 2, and the locally assigned address, that's layer 3. Netstat provides layer 4. Same thing with NetSH. You have port information in the mix, but it doesn't have a MAC address necessarily. And doesn't have the essentials for system baseline, because you have to have the stuff for the host itself. And the reference here is all about other connections, partner connections. Any question about that? Any comments? Okay. You already possess one of the best forensic tools, power of observation. Whether or not you use it, well, depends on you. That is a true statement. Nobody got that wrong. So I guess when it comes to true false, if it's like a sixth of a point, all right, we don't have to worry about that. Multiple answer. Here is a multiple, there are two multiple answer questions that are worth a good bit more that students struggled with. Choose all that apply. Components of a quality forensic program include the interpretation of forensic outcomes to inform consensus for incident stakeholders. So when you're establishing, when you're designing a forensic program, that's a big selling point. You want people to understand that having forensics in the mix allows stakeholders to reach an informed decision, an informed consensus or decision about what happens during an incident. It is it's the greatest value of having forensics in the first place. People aren't spitballing, they know the facts. Remediation and quality assurance. So it helps you to target what you need to change or improve. And that's quality assurance is, it's the word quality is no accident there. So to have a quality forensic program, there has to be a component that addresses the notion of continuous improvement, right? Now, other answers chosen that were not as good an answer: specialized legal counsel by lawyers who are trained in EU data protection requirements. Well, that would be a component of a quality forensic program if it was an international clientele, but a lot of forensic programs don't involve European countries. So that's not the case for most forensic programs, especially ones that are exclusive to the US. Encryption of all data used, stored, or transmitted by an organization. No, that's likely overkill. And those are system security controls. And overuse of encryption can actually make digital forensics a little more difficult, especially if the keys are, if access to keys is a problem. So no, that was never stated as a part of that interest. Any questions at this point? All right, we'll work this one, and then we'll jump down to the multi-answer and the matching. With regard to digital forensics, what do ISO, VHD, and PDF files have in common? They are file formats designed as containers, and they store data internally. That is correct. They can mask changes to internal data as size and metadata are unchanged. So that is also correct. You can take, you can basically noodle with the metadata, like the archive bit. And we talked about this in class explicitly. Let's see about the other answer choices. Must be hashed using MD5 since file size can be very large. Nope. You shouldn't use MD5 because it's faster. You should only use MD5 for quick checks, but MD5 was defeated and retired as a standard. It's still useful as a tool, but it's what is the hash that we said you have to use now? Can you use SHA-1 for cases that have to go to court? Come on, this is recent. Is the use of SHA-1 okay if a person's life and liberty are at stake and it's a felony criminal thing in a criminal court of law? Can you use SHA-1?
Isn't it SHA-2?
It's SHA-2. That is correct. SHA-1 was, they just documented a case called a collision. And so in theory, it's possible for SHA, it's very unlikely, but who wants to get on the stand where a person's life or liberty is on the line and say, well, it's unlikely that they're, using my SHA hash could cause a problem. No, you don't want to say that. You want to say, I used SHA-256. And that's part of the SHA-2 standard. And that has been demonstrated to be sound. You can have confidence in this outcome and this result and what you're seeing right here. See, that's what you want to be able to do. So the SHA-1 obviously is not, and nobody picks SHA-1, can be encrypted unlike other files to evade. No, that's, they can be encrypted, but so can any other file. So to say they can be encrypted unlike other files, yeah, that's a bogus statement. Other files can be encrypted too to evade unauthorized activity. There's no distinction between container files and other data files with regard to whether or not they can be encrypted. That is a false statement. Does everybody understand what we're saying here? Not just container files. And metadata is the big thing there. Okay. Okay, we've answered these two. I'm going to skip these and get to, I just want to check this one to see if everybody got it correct. Did everybody get this correct? Nope. In what manner are the John von Neumann and OSI models of value to digital forensics? Select the best answer from options below. The components of each provide a suitable framework to organize forensic process. So when you're doing network forensics, you can start with a physical layer, the data link layer with the MAC address, where you have broadcast on the broadcast domain. Then you have the network domain, you have the TCP and UDP port level and transport layer. You can basically use each of those like a framework. The same thing is true of the John von Neumann model. You have the three zones. You can always think of a computer system or a digital device in terms of the John von Neumann. And when you're investigating forensically, you can basically use that layout as a checklist to be comprehensive in your approach. Okay. This answer says each model provides a way to generalize the IO zone to allow use of the same forensic tools. You wouldn't use the same forensic tool in different zones. So that's a false statement. That's a bogus answer. Any questions about that one? All right, let's go down to, where were we? These last four. We'll have just enough time. A forensic professional detects a copious, which means large, level of outbound data is being sent from a system. Now, we talked about this multiple times in class. If you're looking at network and you see something like this, but that system is not hosting a live Zoom session and recording video at the same time. What does it mean? Right? Select the most appropriate conclusion or response. And this says even when no applications are loaded. Select the most appropriate conclusion or responses based on this common scenario. A forensic professional must verify the normal level of outbound data using the latest baseline. That is true. And if a baseline is valid, it wouldn't show a huge amount of outbound data in the first place. If you did your baseline with a system that has a huge amount of outbound data, it means you are establishing a baseline of what you think is a clean system, and it's actually a bot. It's a zombie on a zombie network or a botnet. True. Just thought I would kind of animate that to bring sharp relief to that concept. Utilize the command netstat-a to identify services with active connections. Yes, if you had a lot of outbound traffic, you'd want to know where is that data going, what's connected. If you report the user of this system to appropriate supervisory and or legal authorities, that would not be part of your, that would not be an automatic thing. And here's the word, must. Must you involve legal authorities? No. Must you alert supervisory chain for that person? No. You might not. There might be a reasonable explanation for it. Some other user was on it and blew it up. There's more work that needs to happen. You wouldn't engage the supervisory chain until you had more assessment done first, right? The key word to understand there is must. Does everybody understand the difference there? All right. Choose all that apply. Components of a quality forensic program include education awareness, yes, EAT, and the tenets of cybersecurity, namely confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Comprehensive logging of all data, all activity by all users on all systems and devices. That's not what a quality forensic program includes. That's what an insane asylum would include, because the amount of logged data you'd have to sift through on a daily basis, you would never have a life. Everybody with us? Okay. We are almost finished. Is everybody with us?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, discovered artifact scenario. A digital evidence specialist is hired to assist local IT staff who have been trained as digital evidence first responders. Yay! So we have an organization that's invested in the idea that forensics is a good thing, and it's going to be a value added thing for our tech staff. So we're going to train our IT help desk to be first responders in case they encounter something and they won't blow it up, right? The DES is to perform an informal routine investigation that will assess the nature of data compromised on a system owned by a corporation. The DES soon discovers irrefutable and verifiable artifacts that now require under law a formal collection of exhibits for criminal action. Things like human trafficking, child pornography, stuff like that, right? When you are required to engage criminal, that means you've uncovered something really, really bad. However, in an odd turn of events, the DES is unexpectedly directed by the company tech support to drop the matter, since their own logs revealed that there was nothing wrong with, well, there's nothing wrong with the activity in our logs, and no data was changed or deleted, right? So we don't have any evidence that any data is like changed or deleted. Yeah, you're overreacting. I would suspect that one of your IT staff is in on it. That'd be the first, that would be my first hunch. What do you think? Yeah?
Yeah.
Based on this scenario, select any statement below that is appropriate or accurate. The investigation is now formal, that is true, and must include a sworn affidavit to first secure a warrant. Yep, you're gonna have to go into a deep dive. If law enforcement's involved, the line of authority must be clearly established to ensure proper disposition of the case. Why are we saying that's something you have to choose? Well, that's something that obviously didn't happen. If the company tech support is telling you to cease and desist, you don't have the right line of authority. Every forensic investigation has the potential to go right to the moon. So you have to get a clear understanding of people with people you serve. Hey, if I encounter something, I'm not stopping at this desk. I'm going right to HR. I'm going right to the president. I'm going right to law enforcement, right? Now, it's also obvious that because these yahoos in the tech support think they're just gonna, oh, no, there's no problem. These are not the droids that you're looking for. This is like a Jedi mind trick that some tech support people are trying to pull. And they're trying to reverse what they know better, especially if they know they're trained digital evidence first responders. What I'm saying is these aren't any tech support. These are trained tech support. And they know because of their training, they can't just shrug this off, but they're still trying to do it anyway. Hello? That's where an education awareness and training program is warranted. It is obvious that these yahoos have not been forced to sign a document that says, yeah, I know I can go to jail. Yeah, I know that I can get in trouble or get fired if I'm doing things that are wrong. Because the flagrant disregard for proper standards is so obvious. It's like, okay, there is no way that they have an effective EAT program. If they did, no one would pull this stunt in the first place. Oh, they'd try to do other things. They'd probably let the air out of the tire of the, they'd probably go to the parking lot and cut all the tires on the forensic specialist's car or something. They wouldn't try to con the guy out of or gal out of doing their job. Human resources can submit artifacts and logs to law enforcement per local policy. Here's the problem with this statement, the word can. Human resources or the president, stakeholders of the company, must submit artifacts. Not can, must. That's why this question, this answer option is not a good choice. Any questions about this item in particular? Last item, everybody got correct. Everyone got correct. So this concludes our item analysis. I will post the reconciliation. It'll appear right above the assessment in module 1. It'll be 1.6, the reconciliation. And I'd like you to complete that before the end of the week so we can post the final version of module 1 assessment to be completed sometime next week. Does anyone have any questions or comments before we clear?